We met in San Antonio. We both were born in Texas and had always heard about O'Neill Ford, who was a great Texas modernist and regionalist,
Hmm.
and well recognized not only nationally but internationally as a great architect and someone who was merging innovation, engineering with a very strong commitment to environmentalism, passive, smart, practical, yet artful buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And Neil was doing, at the time, everything from schools, campuses, private houses to a variety of civic buildings. So really broad typologies. And we met in that office. We both worked with O'Neill Ford for almost 5 years. And in the process, Ted and I met because O'Neill liked a little bit of, should we say, well, he loved a little conflict. I mean, he liked to stir things up.
What is that?
And so Ted and I were pretty strong-willed little individuals when we were, let's see, I guess I was 29 or 30 and Ted was 27 or somewhere in there. And we thought we could design the world if we were left on our own individually. And Neil was like, well, not only can you not design very well on your own, but I think you need to be together just so I can have fun seeing who wins. And that was his nature. And he was a great teacher, a great man, very active, loved the city, San Antonio. He grew up in North Texas. He migrated to San Antonio to be with his wife, Wanda. And together they were really the bedrock of conservation in San Antonio. O'Neill moved to San Antonio and was working in the WPA on the restoration of San Antonio's oldest village, La Villita, and a collection of old adobe homes. So even though he was a modernist, he also loved the built environment, and especially buildings that were just sprang from the earth, vernacular architecture. At the time so we met, and postmodernism was booming.
Yeah.
And O'Neill was not a fan, and that's putting it lightly. He liked to say he was a pre-modernist, not a postmodernist. And that meant he liked everything that came before postmodernism.
Yeah, gotcha.
He
Pre-postmodernism.
hated everything.
Yeah.
He hated everything postmodern. And in fact, he called postmodernism such names as venereal architecture, because it was veneer peeling off the wall
or something else,
whatever. So he was a postmodernist, not a postmodernist, a pre-modernist, and I'll let Ted fill in some blanks.
Let me ask on the subject of postmodernism, because it is a fairly divisive, call it style of architecture, I guess, amongst architects. At that time, where did the two of you fall? Because it was in its heyday, right?
Yeah. So we were both coming out of school during that time period, and David was at the University of Texas. I was at Stanford, and the people that the hotshots that were coming through those schools that were speaking were all the gods of postmodernism. Then at school, though, there was an environmental movement going on in both of those places where David and I were. But at UT, David discovered a group of architects that were that around a particular architect who had named Plenty Fisk, who'd started this a group to look at alternative energy and alternative ways of thinking. And then at Stanford, just because it was such a strong engineering school, there was a whole lot of activity just kind of all around me that was going on, that was all focused on solar energy. And so a lot of the projects that we were working on were rooted in environmentalism right at that time. But that was what was going on. But both of us were lucky to have some mentors that were steering us in different directions. I had Bill Turnbull, who was all part of that consortium that did Sea Ranch, and Bill was very much about the landscape, and so it was hard to have a big story about postmodern landscape. So when you're trying to connect to the environment and the landscape and the coast of California, a lot of that postmodernism was not right, was not the main piece of the puzzle. But it was what was going on. It was what was being published in the magazines and all. And so, and then again, David could add to his piece of the puzzle, but he really was also doing very, very similar things. He was not finding traction in some of his design classes, but he was finding a whole lot of traction in this wonderful group with Plenty Fix at doing this alternative way of looking at things. What was his group called, David?
Well, what's interesting, because we were lucky in the sense that not only we were lucky to find each other, but we were incredibly lucky to find each other. I mean, it was, drop in the bucket to find someone who you shared your passions with. Mm-hmm. And we were in complete agreement about the role of architecture being more about being artfully practical, welcoming, and connected to the environment. In fact, Ted and I both we actually would prefer to be out of doors than indoors. I mean, and so that's really been a pivotal part of who we are. We've always, our entire firm loves being out of doors for the most part, camping, being outdoors, being in nature, being immersed in wildness. And so both Ted and and I'll let Ted talk a bit about his early history, but I grew up in Austin. I canoed all the major waterways flowing into the Gulf in a canoe with my father and my friends. And this is 1965 to 72. Anyway, in 73, as you know, the oil embargo hit. And it's crazy now, but oil went from $3 a barrel to $12.
Wow.
300% increase. And people forget that really was the first energy shock. And that energy shock kind of coalesced with other things going on in the country, whether it was the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, but also this shift in thinking pretty much brought on by first, I think, Rachel Carson in Silent Spring, and this whole idea that man's impact on our planet is not only unhealthy, but seriously endangering all life over time. And we had that together with Paul Ehrlich's Explosion of Population Bomb book. And there was a sense of, with the oil embargo, there was a sense of, hey, we better, as architects, planners, everyone, we weren't flower power, but we were close. And in Austin, we had this funky anarchic group of professors who were not in the main building. That was the best part. They were so wild and anarchical in their thinking that they were given the annex, which was this humdrum concrete frame building with lay-in tiles falling out everywhere. Yeah. I mean, it was like being in a slum. But what that meant was there were two people, Wolf Hilberts and Plenty Fisk. Wolf Hilberts was making, in 1970, putting electrodes and salt water and building man-made coral reefs that eventually became houses in the Caribbean about 15 years later by just running diodes through the salt water accreting quickly onto ferro cement frameworks. And then he lifts them out of the water, puts them on the island, they dry out, and it's limestone, man-made limestone, basically. So that was going on, and it was totally antithetical. Basically, the notion was everything that's come before has been grounded in art or other stylistic notions. Mm-hmm. And now we have a challenge. Now we have to use the biosciences and alternative thinking to really address this issue of our impact on the planet. Pliny Fisk actually came from Penn. He had studied with Louis Kahn. He had studied with Ian McHarg. Ian McHarg, of course, was famous for the book Design with Nature, the great landscape architect and urban designer who later designed woodlands. And actually, Pliny was working on woodlands when he got the call to be a professor at UT. And he started the Center for Maximum Potential Building Systems, which is going strong today with Gail Vittori, his partner. And together, the two of them were looking in 1971 and 2, before the word resilience or sustainability even existed. Pliny was trying to do buildings that didn't need water, potable water, and didn't need energy. The buildings were all self-sufficient. So we were designing local, regional, caliche block, adobe houses with passive solar systems. There was this wild guy named Steve Bear in New Mexico who was doing really smart, simple engineering feats with passive solar. And one example is he designed these aluminum fins that would open when it's cool and close when it's hot, because the dark side of the fin, when it was closed, would be facing the inside. Anyway, it just worked on a simple basis of heat. And we started playing with all these passive solar, the Trom wall, walls made with 55-gallon drums in water. Not such a smart idea now, but and then mass walls. And so there was this whole revolution of thinking. And it was completely not about what the building looked like at all. It was completely about how do you build a building that has the least possible impact on the planet and is comfortable and is self-sufficient. It did not matter what it looked like. So that was a great way to kind of start my training. And I was in the annex, morning, noon, and night, building, like we built the Oklahoma wind turbine, which is the multi-vaned bicycle turbine. We were doing houses. We were building funny little houses, one-room houses out on the center's site out of town that were truly off the grid. And I'll never forget, Pliny would bring speakers to Austin and do major seminars on alternative energy and just alternative thinking altogether on how to impact urban design and make it less about cars and more about the earth. So it was heady times for sure, and I'll never forget one seminar. The big speaker was Paolo Soleri.
Oh, cool.
Well, yeah, very cool. So Soleri comes in and he's thinking, okay, I am the hero. I'm the guy that does
right.
I'm the guy that does these amazing earthen shaped concrete things that are amazing. And I've got this plan to move 100,000 people into the middle of nowhere in the desert, basically, or North Arizona. So Pliny, I think, being Pliny, could not wait. He's sitting at the front row of this in a filled auditorium with 1,000 people who've all come to hear how brilliant Salieri is. And Salieri's going through his whole process and the urban designing and how he's going to move all these people, because it was so cool to be in a non-car environment under these concrete shell spaces. And Pliny waving his hand furiously, and Salieri's doing his best to ignore him. And finally, Pliny gets up on the stage and asks into the microphone, so you haven't said a word about water. Where's the water coming from so that people can survive in your plan? You get 3 or 4 inches of rainfall in that part of the country. Why do you think this is such a great idea? And oh man, the fireworks, it was great. It was just classic.
What did Arcosante, what did Salieri have to say in response? Do you recall?
It's amazing. He'd never been asked that question.
Of course not, because he shows his amazing drawings and probably has a great presentation, and architects love great drawings, and that's enough to convince us generally.
No, exactly. I think it's one of those, to me, it was one of the great kind of moments where, wait a minute, we're not going about this the right way. We're still stuck in our 3-dimensional solution making that has nothing to do with science or innovation.
So that's a good, I'm going to segue for 1 sec.
Sure,
so
take it.
So at this time, there was at that time, there was a lot of, discussion about where architecture should be headed. And there was a lot of theoretical discussion, and, naturally going on in schools. And so what for us, when both Dave and I were out of school, we both were, gravitated to also doing some construction work. And so we were enjoying both building and designing and the whole process, just the whole notion of how buildings went together. And so O'Neill Ford was a real interesting counterpoint to that education. Even though, yes, we both explored our own ways of looking at approaching architecture from a really pragmatic environmental standpoint. And then, as David pointed out, both of us were heavily involved. We were both lived a charming life, young life of growing up in the country, and spent a lot of times outdoors. And so that combination of being really interested in the outdoors, interested in environmentalism, and interested in practical solutions, O'Neill was this perfect it was a perfect office counterpoint to go to, because O'Neill had not gone to traditional architecture school. He basically had just gotten his license from the back of some kind of book that you could apply through. And so and so
he was fond of saying correspondence school.
Yeah, correspondence school. So he really was, someone who had fallen into architecture in the beginning during the Depression, but with a group of people who were focused on regionalism, which the idea was, and they were Texas regionalists, and they were focused on architecture that was of the particular place, that was built by, the early settlers with an approach to solving just the basic challenges of climate and place and local materials. So he was working from that angle, and then he was also a very, very practical person. So he was thinking along the lines of modernism as something that was just a practical way of building. So he was there, and in joining his office, it was an opportunity to get back to the basics, about asking questions about, well, that would be great, that wonderful shape that you just drew, but how are you going to put a roof on it? Or, what are you making these things out of? And so while you were designing, he would encourage you to be thinking about what those materials were, and had a wonderful, because by that time he's 70 some odd years old, and the people he was just working with were just the young people like us. And so he took plenty of time to talk about his love and passion for materials and building. And so those are, besides the gift of friendship that he gave us, the other one was just this whole passion for building, and a practical passion for building. And that landed in the perfect place for us, because we were not as enamored with what was being published at the time. We were very passionate about building, and so he gave us those additional tools that at the time were not really going on in architecture schools. So he was, what I often like to say, was the perfect graduate school. And so then O'Neill was with us for a number of years, and then he died. And so David and I looked across the our desks and said, what are we going to do now? Because it was quite apparent that architecture, that office was not geared for these young, bucks who were who thought they were pushing the envelope, or thought they could. And,
right.
And so we both thought, I think it's time to start our own shop. And at that time we were both doing, it wasn't, we both had access to other work that was going on, like young architects might have. And so we were, working late at night on other things, or even, so we were doing work already that allowed us to kind of take that chance to go on our own and start an office. And we started slow, and it was a very slow time. And at the time, it was 1984, and banks were starting to go under, and the real estate was, the developers were having to stop and do, not do work. And so when things are slow, it sometimes is one of the best times to start a small office, because you're not looking around the corner going, gosh, look at all the work that somebody else had. No one had work.
It's silver linings.
It's funny
That's
because
one way to put it.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like we've interviewed a lot of architects, and whenever they start their practice, it's always about time, right?
The timing.
It's always like recession, crisis, and all of that. But in a way, as you put it, you can only go up from there, right? If you start at the very bottom.
I did want to ask, you had mentioned that office didn't feel like a place for two young architects who were more rebellious, let's say. In what way did it not feel like they're the right place?
Well, at the time, the firm was expanding. They had work in Saudi Arabia.
Oh,
it was actually work that O'Neill didn't like. Well, actually, the truth is, anything O'Neill didn't touch, as a rule, he didn't like. But so I can't really say that.
Yeah.
But he had some very strong partners, and Ted and I, we were pretty outspoken. Well, we are outspoken. We were outspoken about, hey, we should really be doing things that make a difference environmentally, and a lot of things just were not going in that direction, especially when O'Neill wasn't involved in it.
Gotcha.
They weren't really following the precepts of O'Neill's underlying passion and commitment to the role of architecture. And in his mind, they had become too institutional and were basically, I think in a lot of ways, afraid to take on the political forces, when locally he was not afraid ever to advocate for the right thing to do.
Gotcha.
Whether it's building a freeway through a park, which they ended up fighting all the way up to regional Texas Supreme Court to keep TxDOT from pushing a freeway through the major open space. And he made enemies. He did, and he was okay with it. And it's something that we've always appreciated because he felt architects had a major role, much more so than just building buildings, and much more so than just building places. Our role was to always make places better for everybody. And he was so, I think, being brought up in and being part of the Depression, seeing the role that governance could make in the built environment through the WPA effort and through his effort through a variety of organizations. But Ted and I were definitely, at the time, the firm liked the people who were going along with their process. And we were always bucking. We bucked the process. And they had already made us several people that were our age partners or associates. And it clearly skipped over us, obviously skipped over us, because we were a pain in the ass. We were not going to make, we weren't going to make their lives easier because we were.
One thing, so I'm going to, one of the things that, and it's, David and I did not, we often say we started our office before we probably even should have. We had just gotten licensed. In fact, I wasn't even licensed.
You were not licensed.
I wasn't. And so
how old were you guys? How old were you guys?
I think I was 29.
Yeah, it's pretty early.
Yeah. Anyway, but anyway, and David was, 33 or whatever. But one of the things, and it was the one, we worked in a variety of different places before O'Neill's office, but not for very long. And so O'Neill's office was and by the time we were leaving, it was an office of about 80 people. So it was a significant scale.
Yeah.
And but it started a little smaller than that. And we learned a lot about the dynamics of transition from O'Neill to his partners, to his younger partners. And so we were watching the choices and the ways they were doing things. And so it did inform a lot about, when we started our office, what we knew we wanted to do, because there were a lot of things that they were doing that were right. But we also knew the things that we didn't want to do. And one of the things was, as we often said, we didn't want to have a place that would not have appreciated the entrepreneurial spirit of people like David and Ted. And they didn't. It was, offices get to a certain point, they get to a certain kind of established condition, they get their own kind of internal politics, and they start sometimes losing those opportunities for really some engaging, youthful, younger architects who really could keep continuing that whole process of evolution. So when we started our office, we knew that is definitely not what we wanted to do, and we still are having to work hard at making sure that is the case. Now we're twice the size that office was. We're now 150 architects, and the true challenge now for us, because we're now basically at O'Neill's age, is thinking of, and we've been thinking about how to make those transitions and building, strong partners and then young partners, making sure that those again, David and Ted entrepreneurial spirit types can see that, you don't always have to start a new office. You can actually work with an ongoing condition. And one of the things that was lucky for us was when we did start slow, and the work that was available at the time were projects that were small projects, residential projects that were in the country, for the most part, kind of in the Texas kind of ranch country, and so they were for clients who were not screaming and yelling for style. They were screaming and yelling for, or they were asking for something that connected to the environment. They wanted a portal to their landscapes where they were working. And so those early projects allowed us to hone a philosophy that, architecture ought to be of its place, materials of its place, practical, more porch than house, that kind of thing. And it allowed us to develop a philosophy around that, and a philosophy that would have legs, that was not grounded in either Ted or David's style of architecture. It was a philosophy that as more architects joined us, or new clients, joined us for this journey, they could at least start with that philosophy and then participate in it and make it, continue to evolve the architecture. And that's what has happened. And so it's allowed a lot of joint ownership in the work, which has allowed it to continue to kind of evolve and be interesting for younger architects.
Yeah, so I have a number of questions. Going back to what you were saying about your guys' age and where you are at in your careers, and then your office being 150, which is quite large for an architecture office, right? The first question is, so how have you maintained that openness to different ideas from, let's say, specifically younger architects, architects who were in your position back when you were working at that office, as you were growing from 2 people to 150? Because that's a massive... 150 is a lot of people, and offices, design offices, creative offices become very, let's say, corporate in their ways pretty quickly.
So I think part of the beauty of growing an office is we had no expectations. We were just trying to survive in the beginning. And we just added slowly. In the first 10 years, we were probably at, 12 or 15. 18, because we ended up getting a transformative project. And we can talk about how that evolution happened, because I think it is perhaps meaningful to others on this who are listening in. But part of the beauty of growing slowly at the beginning, and as Ted said, our early work was largely working with ranchers, families who had ranches who were just going out for a long weekend or a week. And so they weren't their primary house. And so you take all the pressure off of what is my life like in my house, and how does my house reflect who I am? Got away from all that, especially when the postmodern era was just overwhelming everything. And just a side note, because it was an interesting interchange. So Michael Graves was a visiting critic to the University of Texas at Austin. And O'Neill made a point, because he was the visiting critic the semester before. And when he found out that they were bringing Michael Graves up there, it freaked him out. He thought, okay, there has to be an intervention. So he went up to Austin, and Michael Graves was giving this little talk, and Neil's in the audience, and it was O'Neill was really challenging him about, but what does this mean, what you're saying? How does this affect other people, and why is it so important to you that you design from the outside in? What happened to form follows function? It was, anyway, he was very much he was a true modernist. And so he was very much about embracing engineering. And in fact, he would get upset when Louis Kahn would take credit, or people would give credit to Louis Kahn for creating the first interstitial floor for infrastructure services at the Richards Lab building, when 5 years before, he had done the Texas Instruments semiconductor plant in Dallas, and he had brought in candela from Mexico City and had actually done hyperparabolic concrete vaults for the roof that spanned, without columns, I think it was 120 or 140 feet for the free floor area. And then he did design a 12-foot tall interstitial floor that had all these columns and all the services accessible: water, power, energy, everything, oxygen's running through all this stuff. So he was very much, and he didn't really care about what the exterior looked like. Frankly, it was, I want to make this an incredible factory that has incredible daylight in it and people feel good in it. And so that was a very strong grounding for us. And to answer, well, that was really that was a total trip. See, this is what happens when I have too much coffee and I wander off the planet. Actually, the reason that our firm feels like you can make a difference is that we're broken into studios.
Okay.
And the studios are comprised of anywhere from 12 to 15 people to 30. And I lead the urban studio, which is all about urban design, civic, cultural buildings, development-driven work, multifamily housing, office, libraries, etc. Ted leads the residential studio, which is all about providing housing for many, which is either the prefab effort or other efforts to drive costs down for design, but also designing really amazing, beautifully fitted buildings that are either, or houses that are either urban or highly rural or off the grid or in the Caribbean or wherever, all over the planet with a light touch, but rooted. Yeah. So that, and one of the things I'll say is that Ted has kept that driving spirit of the underlying core of our belief and continues to refine it and make it memorable. And it is the underpinning that informs all of our work at all scales. So we have another studio that does ecological conservation,
gotcha.
Parks, arboreums, rural birding centers, you name it. But also some eco-hospitality, light on the earth places, and then institutional work, universities, larger scale labs, buildings of that character, and then a robust K through 12.
You guys do a lot of different types of projects. Yeah.
So what don't you do?
Yeah, what don't you do? That's a better way to ask the question.
We do not do healthcare.
Okay.
Yet.
That is a too tough conundrum. But we do wellness and we do spa, we do hospitality in a big way. And I think we are unafraid to do things, sometimes stupidly, but hey, this is how you learn. I mean, we've done towers. I can't say we've done them well. But we really care about, we love a challenge.
Yeah.
And I think one of our best early on, we had two projects that I think.
I'm just going to interrupt before you go.
Go ahead.
Before we get into
projects. Please.
But to stick with this, looking back for us, where we were at Fort Pell and Carson, and our desire to leverage the great things they did, and to make sure to kind of heed some of the lessons that we learned there. And so one of those is growing, but growing in a way where people have a lot of ownership and agency in it. And so one of the the thing that has helped us a lot is having a design philosophy that a lot of people can embrace. And so it's clients and architects, young architects can embrace, but they can also make it their own, because it's the clarity is, we want to make something that is particular to its place. We often discuss when we first start projects, what makes this unique and different from another one. Sometimes projects are going to only move the needle a little bit. Some projects are huge opportunities to really make really kind of a transformative new directions. But we leave that as something that is being, because there's so many projects. The beautiful thing about having a larger office is that some projects, may not move the needle a lot, and some may move it a lot. But having kind of an understanding and an appreciation and a group ownership of all the work allows people to kind of feel like we're doing it together. But I think that what keeps younger architects' imagination is that ability to be working with clients who are already embracing what we're doing. So they're not pushing back. They're embracing and agreeing that this is a direction that they wanted to go in. That's why they came to the office.
Yeah.
And then having architects that are also can kind of have that special agency. One of the things that it was a unique piece of the puzzle for us was starting our office in San Antonio, which it was where O'Neill's office was. And then we just moved next door, or down the street. And San Antonio was an interesting filter in those early years, and continues to be an interesting filter, which is that it's not on a young architect radar to say that, gee, I can't wait to move to San Antonio, Texas.
Sure.
And so instead, they were making the decision to move to work for Lake Flato because they were intrigued by the work. And so it was very, very common that they'd done their research and decided that they would be willing to, spend, a lot of their, anyways, they were willing to move to a place that wasn't, obviously on architects' number one wish list of places to move to. So that was its own filter. And so we ended up with great talent that was already interested in what we were doing. So they were joining us, believing that they could make a difference within that, within that bandwidth of design philosophy. So that's helped a lot. And so that's allowed us to do what David described as we were able to expand. We broke into studios, which created the feeling of smaller offices within an office. But our challenge is creating a group ownership over all of those studios. So that continues still to be a challenge and a struggle. It's a lot about communication because, and interest in what another studio is doing. And so having design reviews that are cross studio design reviews, critically important, and a variety of people participating in those design reviews, making design a huge discussion point when we can. So all of those things are critically important.
Yeah, there's a number of interesting things said. One is the the point about the types of clients that you attract, which is not part of the answer I would have expected, but it makes perfect sense because it is quite, obviously, this is quite discouraging to have a meeting with a client who doesn't resonate with what you're doing. And in that case, it's not a good fit, but that can be quite deflating for any architect or designer sitting across from them. The other one that's been kind of touched on is your, let's say, approach to architecture, which you've mentioned a few of the principles within it, and it seems to be more principle based rather than something superficial where we're, Smith and Smith architects and we only use the palette of gray kind of situation. And because your approach is more about certain principles that allows others to adopt it and make it their own, the question is that, and you've also talked about, at least in the former office, that aesthetics, where they're not important or far secondary. But obviously aesthetics and beauty are a big part of creating great architecture. So how does that part of design get discussed or become worked through within your practice and the work?
Well, I think you got to go back just a second because Ted and I both, again, I think part of the reason we work so well together from the very beginning is that we loved the same things that other architects had created, particularly Louis Kahn, Glenn Murcutt. Those were, for us, in the time of postmodernism, that was what was resonating with us and still resonates today. And in fact, we're very close to Glenn. Glenn's, he's been in our office. We've had people go to his office in Australia, and he has been very generous. And as a one-man show, it is amazing what he's accomplished in his career in terms of shaping people's approach to design. So to your point, I would argue that you do have to go about your process and your belief system with an attitude that the beauty has to come forward through the process and through how things fit together and how they dance and play well together and feel. And that's the primary thing we got from O'Neill, was the tactile, material-driven craft of building. Neil would bring craftspeople into the office, masons, carpenters, tile makers, artisans, and he would just say, "You don't know how you're turning that corner with that stone. I'm going to bring in the mason and show you why you can't build it that way." And it was so Ted's right. It was an incredible graduate school for learning about how to build, but we were we're always inspired by, Bucky Fuller was another one who was very much, Plenty Fisk and Bucky were friends. That was, it was all of a typology of, we're going to be modern, but we're going to be smart and we're going to be practical but we're going to be really inventive. And that sense of invention doesn't necessarily mean that you don't get to worry about the exterior. We did care about how things felt and looked, and always have. And to your point, I think having a philosophy, and in fact, our vision statement is that we seek to create dynamic environments that nurture all life. And that nurturing all life is really about everything we want to do must and should heal the earth. That's what Ted has always said. Are we healing the land? Every project we've ever started, Ted's first question was, yeah, that looks good, but are we really healing the place first? And that's been our driving idea. It leads to a certain aesthetic that we're very proud of the fact that I think we've created a resilient strategy for building buildings and shelters that are beautiful, but they're not beautiful in the way beauty was seen 40 years ago, right? The postmodern era is all about a facade with weirdo fenestration and a lot of color and facadism. And we're driven by we have a real strong, simple purpose. And I think that simple idea, that simple purpose is prevalent through everything we touch. And I was going to say, as a young architect, we were happy to do anything. We did anything just to stay solvent, Yeah. So the first decade is very difficult, especially when Texas economy was in the doldrums, in recession. But there are times when a project that we don't think we can get, we get. And one of them was, out of the blue, we got an inquiry to submit for the Burlington Northern Railroading corporate headquarters in Fort Worth. And at the time, all we'd ever done commercially was 2 branch banks and a small branch library. And yet we're being asked. And it was all just luck. We had a friend who was the director of the Dallas Art Museum who put us on the list because he liked what we did. And it matriculated through. And lo and behold, not only do we get shortlisted, we get the job, and we get the job not based on work we'd done in the past, but by us telling Burlington, you need to make your campus about your history, the legacy of railroading architecture, bridges, silos, old train stations, amazing, incredible. And by the way, you got to have some trains because they were 1.5 miles from the rail.
Mm-hmm.
And they loved it. They loved this romantic notion of when you go to the campus, you sense your purpose. And your purpose in that case is Burlington then merged with Santa Fe, but Burlington manages all the Chicago rail that connects everyone in Chicago. They track all the trains across North America at that center in Fort Worth. And that, by us being able to do that project with another local architect, it proved to us and to everyone else that we were capable of creating an architecture at a variety of scales that could be enlivened by this commitment to placemaking, regionalism, environmentalism. I think I've talked enough. Marina. I'm waiting for Marina to say something. I know Marina's
This is great. I hear about trains. I hear about energy.
She's got some trick questions at the end.
No, this is
one of the. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, please.
If you don't. Well, I was going to say, you were asking a lot of what we do. We have this design philosophy that says that we're going to connect to the place and get to know the place, but we all struggle with all the same challenges, which is we're having to make buildings and they have to have openings in them and they have to have logic to them. And how do you do that with a group of people? And so a lot of what we do, and when David discussing the Burlington Northern, that was a good example. We were asking those questions, or what are the new opportunities with this particular condition? Because otherwise your building might look a lot like the last one you did if the conditions aren't any different.
Yeah.
And we don't want to encourage just doing something new for new sake. We want to encourage looking at the problems we have or the opportunities we have and asking the questions of what are the new opportunities. Sometimes it's a new place, it's a new region, so it's going to require new materials or a new approach to the weather. But other times it's a client with a very particular desire to do something, or the site or the neighbors so we really try to focus on that early discussion about what are the things that we can do here. And again, the exciting opportunity that we have by being at the scale we are and getting to work at all the different scales we get to work at and all the different locations we get to work at is that we we can you can have that discussion about, well, we're doing this remarkable thing over there in that studio, and let's go look at what they're doing. But in this particular case, our main challenge is we need to get the building built quickly. And so since quick is the challenge, that's the main piece of the puzzle, then we need to think about a construction system that has to, that would accommodate that. And then you get to then you made a decision on a construction system, and then you start asking the questions, well, what can we accomplish with that construction system? And so that starts driving a lot of design decisions.
Yeah.
And so what has happened with David and me now is, I think almost our most important role is being, kind of the elder statesmen who are supposed to be the practical guys that are supposed to ask the questions about, like O'Neill once did to us.
Yeah.
How do you put the roof on it? It's wait a minute. Are we overthinking this? I mean, one of our favorite things that we used to ask all the time, and we still do, which is, what is the contractor going to think about these details? Are they going to say that, gee, this is really, really cool? Or are they going to say that we had overthought it? Because it's really easy when you focus on structure and you focus on the connection of a window, and you're maybe, if you've made the decision you're going to be doing it in steel, and then you've made the decision that it needs to be prefabricated in another location because we're building in a remote location. And so you can go deep into the weeds on those details, and before you know it, what needs to pull you back is, what's the guy in the, what's the welder going to think about these things? And so that is kind of what informs a lot of the ways we do things, of that kind of practical notion of building.
It's really interesting, because in speaking with the two of you, and we speak to a lot of architects on the show, there seems to be, amongst maybe most of them or us, that in the entire creative process of designing a building, there's a feeling of authenticity to the process for each of the offices. They all do slightly different things, or very different things. But there's this kind of a sense of, if you're asking the right questions at the beginning, then the solutions kind of show up. And when you're drawing something, you can kind of feel that it's being what it wants to be. And you can kind of feel when it's not that.
You have said it very well, and there is, and that's and you want to have that discussion. You really want to have this very thoughtful, open discussion in the beginning. So, and everyone's in the room. Say you have a group of 5 people going to work on the project, and so you circulate, you ask, and then you try to pare it down to the few key things. And if you do pare it down to the few key things, you can keep going back to those. And you're right, it just feels so, and it keeps you on track. And sometimes it's schedule, sometimes it's budget, sometimes it's this, it's that, and it's always, it always still has to come back to, this building is going to be here a long time after we're gone. And, a lot of the kind of things that we encourage now is building buildings that are not so complicated that they can have very, very different lives in the future. That's probably one of the most important things. Yeah. And that keeps you from overthinking a lot of things. And it encourages you to encourage your clients to, not make such particularly odd decisions that later someone else, when they inherit their building, they're going to have to remodel it, or it's not going to be flexible for another use. There's so much about, an eccentric idea is not necessarily a good idea.
Yeah, right.
Well, we were, I don't know, Ted gets tired of me hearing this. We've only been telling each other stories for 40 years. So at some point we run out of different stories. But one of the very first things that O'Neill inculcated into us, just hammering over and over, is that you're never going to design something as beautiful as a tree. And the tree is the most beautiful thing on the planet. So go plant trees. And I think it was a way of putting into perspective what our job is as architects, is to be artfully practical, not be form-based, be more rigorous about the impact we have on each other, on all living organisms, and how can we heal the earth and shelter ourselves with the least possible impact. The idea that he also, and we've done, and to great extent, is we've also advocated every time we're in Texas. It's not like we're in the hotbed of environmentalism.
Sure.
I mean,
sure.
Look at our state.
Yeah.
It's, and yet we've won more Committee on the Environment top 10 awards than all the big firms. We won more than any firm in the United States. Why? It's because we have a process that we believe in. We start with every project, no matter what the scale, with an integrated design charrette. We bring the owner, the contractor, the users, sometimes neighborhood groups and community people into the room, and we set serious metrics, pretty much based on LEED Platinum as a goal always, and we'll back up from that. But we have an in-house engineer, Heather Holdridge, who is incredible at pulling everybody into a room. And after the end of a day, we have on the wall building performance goals that everybody agrees are important and should be attained in Texas. And if you can do it in Texas, you ought to damn well do it anywhere. And we're very proud of the fact that we have merged the art and architecture with the biosciences and the sense of commitment to others besides humankind. And so by being rigorous and left-brained and having performance metrics that requires integrated design, getting the right engineers, the right civil engineers, the right engineering design team together to solve each and every problem, means that we're learning all the time. We learn so much from other designers, other engineers, landscape architects, everybody. And that's the joy of what we do, because we're always pushing the limits. And pushing the limits means, whether it's the library that's the most daylit library in the United States, also uses the least amount of potable water of any civic building. Those are, and we were able to do it by convincing the city of Austin that we could do it and not impact the budget, that they would still get the same quality of experience, but it would be in a high performance building, cost less to build, less to maintain, and be a joy to be in because of the abundance of natural light. So simple, it sounds simple, but you have to have a commitment to the rigor of performance and resource conservation. And finally, I'll just say that Ted and I have, for 40 years, cared about things other than architecture. We've, together with Nature Conservancy, Environmental Defense Fund, we've both been at the state level engaged with these entities, and we've convinced people like the Texas State Parks, conservation groups, to set aside habitats as wilderness zones. And so we've been doing that. And so from Texas to Florida to even West Virginia, we've set aside about 85,000 acres of conservation habitat protected environments. And we're really, that and the creation of our firm is probably our greatest joy, honestly. I mean, when we got the firm award 20 years ago, we said, and we still believe it, that it's our greatest single accomplishment. And we couldn't be doing this. We couldn't be having this conversation with you and without our 11 or 12 partners, our many associates.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are buildings that David and Ted don't even breathe on, much less touch. But it is such a joy to see other people excelling in all these different building types, and we still manage to keep our momentum up and keep this commitment to, as you said, creating rooted buildings, authentic, each and every one a new kind of pursuit to create grounded architecture that is inherently resilient. And the other thing I think we're proudest of is I think that we've elevated the porch in almost every building type to be the most important room in a building. Whether it's the reading room in the Austin Central Library is a porch.
Mm-hmm.
The arena that the Spurs play in has a huge sombrilla that is the only arena in the NBA where you can be outdoors, be secured, eat barbecue, important, dance at halftime. So, we're so lucky to have found each other. Honestly, we could not be here without having found each other. And part of I think having, for a young firm, I would always urge you to find someone you really trust, that you really have alignment with, but who's also, well, let's just face it, obsessive compulsive.
Of course, you have to be in this industry.
Workaholic.
Sure. Yeah.
Willing to work 80 hours a week for the first,
15 years.
35 years.
Oh, no, that was off.
Anyway,
but
I'm going to let I'm still waiting for Marina to say something.
Why you don't let me talk?
She's not the guest.
Actually,
well, here you are.
Actually, you brought something very interesting, which is, the idea of regionalism in architecture, which, coming from France, where each part of France has very different regional architecture, and then moving to the States, which is not so much as strong as it is over there. It's a very interesting notion, which I also feel maybe is getting lost a little bit with modern architecture. There is kind of like those standard of modern design that just, become more international standards than regional standards. So I think this is a very interesting topic. And on that, how big is the barbecue culture and program on projects in Texas? I mean, is it an important aspect of people living in Texas, or is it not so much?
The barbecue, eating barbecue? No, sorry, what? What was your, sorry?
Yeah, she transitioned from regional architecture to barbecue. And how important barbecue is, I don't know. What?
Well, barbecue is not very important to me, but so it's kind of a funny, there's, actually the comparison to France in the sense of, you have a lot of different regional approaches. One of the things in Texas is because the state has a big range of weather conditions, really dry, on the western side of the state, to extremely wet and forested on the eastern side, and then you have the Gulf, and you have a natural big swing of weather conditions, and then you had some of the earlier architecture that was built in those areas. They had to work with those conditions, and so we had good examples of different regional responses. And so then yes, and then you think of modernism as something that can cut across all regions, and it's an approach, but the core of modernism for us is the practical piece. And so that practicality means that it needs to adjust and change as it works in different environmental conditions, obviously. And so that's why I like thinking of us as regional modernists, and investigating and leveraging, what particular places have to offer. And yeah, getting to know the food is important. I don't know about the barbecue piece, but you have to eat barbecue in the shade, and you have to eat it outdoors because it's got a strong scent. So it accommodates some big porches. But
or tacos.
Oh, I could go for that too.
So
taqueria. Yeah, so I think the way you keep fresh, I think, is always in any project. We also start a project by thinking about what we call precedents, because I think we are part of a continuum. What we do as architects is a continuum. We look to the past, we dream about the future, and we build in the present. And each project, we collect imagery, whether it's regional architecture, vernacular architecture that was serving a certain character or dealt with the sun a certain way or had local materials. But we also look at typologies too that are all across the world, and how would that was a really smart seating bowl, for instance, on an arena, and that was built somewhere else. How do we bring it in and make it feel like it belongs to San Antonio and for the Spurs, just to stay with that idea? And we always find ourselves, some of these project types are very introverted. I mean, an arena doesn't want windows necessarily. Yeah. They don't want distractions from the outdoors. But we designed the arena with huge porches for the food F&B enterprise. So unlike some arenas, you actually hang out with views outdoors at getting barbecue, tacos, hot dogs, popcorn, and this god-awful orange red cheese dip that I think doesn't fall apart at 12,000 feet underwater. But it's that continuum of we always are learning. We're learning from the past. We're dreaming about the future. It's why we really loved Louis Kahn and still love Louis Kahn, and so many others. And it's also, what we do is so hard. I mean, I've been on projects that have lasted a decade from the beginning to the completion. So has Ted. And this requires an amazing commitment by everybody on the team to keep the principles high and the vision that we started with long ago ever more present, and always hold it in steadfast in your memory as you move from SD to DD to CDs to, oh my God, VE, value engineering, my favorite, to finally post-occupancy. So we do care a lot about the users, and we always do post-occupancy analysis, because it's also it's the best way to learn if our precepts were right about how spaces were going to be used. And it's part of this continuum of learning and dreaming about, environments that can look to the future, work in the present, and be rooted intrinsically in that place.
That's great. I know we're coming up on the hour, so I have a final question for each of you, which we always ask, and that is, what is your favorite building that's not necessarily one of your own? In fact, most people don't choose one of their own.
Yeah,
but you can if you want
times.
to.
Well, that is it's a great question, and there's so many because I would just got back from Copenhagen and Amsterdam and spent just a lot of time on a bicycle going from some really amazing new architecture that's being built in Copenhagen to just some of the great old stuff that's just been sitting around for the for many years, and furniture design and all those kind of things. So it's a challenge. I almost can't. It's kind of hard to not remember just the last really great building that I went and looked at. So, but you then fall back on, well, God, you gotta choose the thing you love so much, right? And I don't. It all depends on. It does matter what scale you're talking about, or because we work at all these different scales. I mean, now we're focusing on interiors heavily, and so thinking of just even the interior spaces, furniture and landscape, and just so many different elements. So I think I'm going to answer with two projects that are just different scales. So one, I just remember vividly how excited I was when I first went through the Rudolf Schindler's house that he built in California. And part of why I picked that one out is because here's an architect, who's come from Vienna, and he's overwhelmed by how wonderful the climate is in Southern California, and he has, he's working for Wright on the Hollyhock house, but he's going to build, what's he going to build for himself? And so he builds this very modest house and picks up on, tilt wall and landscape, because you can build, outdoor rooms, you can build smaller interior spaces because you're going to leverage the outdoor spaces. And, and it was done at, anyway, the house just, and it even thinks that you can live differently, that everyone can have studios and agency, and husbands and wives can, don't have to have, you don't, and you sleep up in sleeping baskets, and everything about that house is a marvelous celebration of the place. So that's one. Then you'd go to, another scale, which is Lou Kahn's, in our own backyard, the Kimball, and how light comes into that space, and the making of the concrete, and how he picked up on in the area. It's an area of barns and things where he was building that museum, and so it picked up on some of that too. So, but I could just go on and on. Let's hear what David's going to tell us.
It's the most unfair question. That's why we ask it. We have yet to visit
It's important, but you do need why that you would bother to say why those things are important.
We have yet to visit the Kimball Art Museum, but it's on the list for sure.
Oh my God, that is inexcusable. Well, I'm going to make this really easy.
Yeah,
the Kimball.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, and one of the reasons. So when Louis Kahn was designing all these museums, one of the things that Louis Kahn was really smart about is he had Commandant as his structural engineer. And I heard Commandant speak about the Kimball at the Kimball, and you would have thought that Commandant designed the Kimball with his vaults, that he had to figure out how to shape and how to pour and how to separate at the top of the vault where the forces are greatest. Hey, do a slot for light to come in. So there was that piece of it that shaped it, but then Louis Kahn was working with an incredible lighting designer who was all about talking about light And that's really the beauty about the Kimball is there's a variety of light everywhere present. Even though it's concrete vaults and pretty much opaque, it's the most incredibly daylit space with the smallest amount of aperture ever. I mean, the skylight, I think, is 12 or 14 inches wide.
Wow.
And so the little reflector at the top of the vault bounces light onto a wash of the vaults. The vault glows. So the lighting designer said a wash of light is critical. Another character of light is the play of brilliance, which is like fireworks at night or light shifting, ever moving, kinetic through leaves. And so he designed these courtyards with arbors that had vines covering them, and the light through those leaves is always fluttering and changing, and you're seeing that light at the ends of these vaults ever shifting around. And then finally, the third type of light was the focal glow, or this shape of light, like it's a slot at the end of the vault that the sun comes through and tracks. As the day shifts through, that sun shape moves through the spaces in a variety of ways. So it's just, it kicks ass. You got to get your ass down there. You got to get some barbecue, take it into the vault, see how far you get past, see how far you get past security. So I have a second building too, and it's the Pantheon. And it just, how in the hell do you not say Pantheon? It's 2,000 years old, concrete, spans, I don't know, it's still one of the largest single span vaults. And every time I go, I just am amazed that first, the structure has stood for so long. But those Romans, tell you what, they were master builders. Yeah. Whether it's coming up with how to do glass or how to do polyolithic concrete or how to do concrete below the water. I mean, there's a beauty in engineering that I think the Pantheon and the Kimball both, because they're both about light.
Yeah. That's a great point. Those are great answers. Ted and David, thank you so much for making the time on a Friday morning. In this case, this was so much fun. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the conversation. See, an hour and a half goes by super quick. We could have kept going for another probably a couple hours.
We're ready to go. I mean, come on.
Maybe it'll be to be continued next time over barbecue. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, or a taco.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail. If you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion, feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.